By that I meant to myself, and I think for many of us, just didn't know how much we needed a good love story in this day and age. And in the end, a love story that left me optimistic. Yes, there's turbulence, yes, there's trauma, but in the end, I came out feeling optimistic about life. And I'm wondering, is that a totally naive reading on my part, or is that something that you had hoped?
No, you're my perfect audience. of one, maybe. No, I feel uplifted by such endings too, and yeah. And it's true that these two characters who are misguided characters who don't really fit together socially, temperamentally, and history plays its tricks on them, that in the end they realize that they have nobody but each other. It's kind of, yeah, it's kind of sublime, yeah, and it's true that
it's heavily romantic somehow. Yeah. But I also, I mean, I think for me, I also started out saying that 2018 has been such an insane year in so many levels, but it's also we're living in turbulent times again. And I think to see this portrait, which is obviously set in a different period, but to see this now somehow felt urgent. And I don't know if you thought about that at all, about the context in which your film would be read.
Not so much, but I feel my own urge for these stories, you know, and part of the reason why I went back to Poland to make films, but also went back in time. It's out of this urge to tell these kind of stories, which has kind of transcend time, but where you know, the emotional life is not ruled by the digital world, where things happen for real and have huge consequences, you know, where, you know, it's not a world of multiple choice, you know. So I definitely have that, you know, desire to see it and to make it, you know, and to show it rather. So and the reaction of audiences, also to Ida, but to this one even more, shows that there is a real craving for that too. And not just the story, but also, you know, just the way you make films, the idea of hand making films in a non-industrial way also seems to have a you know, a good impact on audiences, because they feel it's kind of, there's nothing kind of industrial, you know, it's not a film where you can feel the division of labor. This is the script, this is the photography, this is the music, this is everything kind of was brought together in a very amateurish, old-fashioned fashion.
Hardly amateurish, but old-fashioned can be good. I didn't read anything about this film. I obviously knew your work and knew who you were and what you were capable of before I saw it, but I didn't know until afterwards how deeply personal this film is or may be. And so I hope we can talk a little bit about that. I have a quote, you've spoken about it a bit in the press, but so on the background of the film, you've described your parents as, and you can tell me if this is a false quote, but the most interesting dramatic characters I've ever come across, both strong, wonderful people, but as a couple, a never-ending disaster.
More or less, yeah. I can subscribe to that.
How close is this? How is this interpretation, this dramatic interpretation, the cinematic interpretation of your parents?
It's pretty close in the mechanics, the way they meet, and he's 10 years older and seems like an authority. She's this hot-headed young woman, and the way they react to each other, they read or misread each other, then the separation, then reuniting abroad and discovering that they're not quite what they remember or what they imagined about each other, and of course exile changes. All that happened to my parents. All these kind of splitting up and getting back together, marrying other people, leaving the country, dumping other people, getting back together again, all that kind of stuff, you know. Much more messy than here. But also at the end of the 40 years of this kind of stuff, this was only 15 years. mainly because I didn't want to change actors halfway. But at the end of it all, they were too tired to fight. They're both quite ill and tired, and they were the most touching, loving couple you can imagine. They were holding hands, and the whole world was kind of passing them by, and they didn't care. You know, they had nobody but each other. So yeah, so it was a great love story at the end of the story. You know, but it didn't look like it.
But you gotta stick with it till the end. That's the point. So let's talk about your actors. When you were casting Victor and Zula, I mean, did you have something in your mind? How do you reconcile this portrait of something so intimate, right, as parents, onto characters, onto actors that you're then casting for this type of project?
Well, I wasn't so literal about the resemblance, you know. I just wanted the mechanics to be similar and the contrast between them to be clear. It so happens that my mother was blonde, very Slav, and kind of temperamental and so on, and musical. She was a ballerina. She ran away to the ballet rather than to. Although she did dance in a folk ensemble too at some point. And my father was tall, dark, more phlegmatic. So these two kind of correspond type-wise. But then I forgot that it's anything to do with my parents, and just kind of, you know, and dealt with what's possible in cinema. You know, I mean, you don't want to be literal about everything. And when I was writing, I already imagined that Joanna was in the right ballpark. For one thing, she could sing. I'd worked with her on 2 previous films, and in one of them, in Ida, she did nothing but sing. She was the pop singer in Ida. And in The Woman in the Fifth, she has a little moment where she also sings. But anyway, she could sing, but also she had that kind of energy, this kind of honesty, cynicism mixed with romanticism in a very peculiar way. And she was this type who could, you know, declare her love, and then the guy walks off, so she said, well, fuck you then, and just goes the other way and jumps into the river or falls off a bar, you know, that kind of stuff. You know, these kind of twists. Yeah, so she was, you know, pretty early on in my mind as the perfect lead. For the man, I was for a while thinking of using a real musician to have that musical relationship, that magic of that relationship in front of our eyes. But after a while, I realized that most of the musicians I considered couldn't act or didn't have the right aura. So I went for a professional, a very good actor, Tomasz Kot, who I'd seen in some things, where he didn't play this kind of Gregory Peck type leading man, but I could see he's got it somehow. If you give him the right hairstyle, light him, and, you know, in a certain way. Yeah, so then brought them together, you know, spent a lot of time kind of just meeting, talking about the film. I sent them off to dance lessons so they just get familiar with each other. You know, and in the end, they became the thing. You know, I forgot it's anything to do with my parents. You know, I was working with this material that I had, and yeah, and they had their own autonomous, you know, life from now on.
So pushing a little further.